basically the Holy Spirit opened my eyes, the veil fell, and those light beings that I knew for years and years and years, once I could see them through the eyes of Jesus, immediately they looked like terrifying demons. So I had
Wow.
no doubt that like, holy crap, this things are demons.
Yeah, so it's great to meet you, Dylan. If you want to maybe introduce yourself, where you're from, and maybe just a short bit of before we kind of dive into the main part of the interview.
Yeah. Yeah. My name is Dylan. I'm originally from Southern California. I left home at 18 to start to travel around the world. Kind of a bit of the backstory, but we can get into that maybe at some point. For a variety of reasons, but mainly I just wanted to see the world. I love backpacking, love traveling. So I've been out of California for like 15 years now, but I originally grew up there. And I'm now living in Guatemala. I moved here about 4 months ago, living in Antigua at the moment.
Amazing, amazing. So we originally connected through someone called Kirsty. I came across her on like a Facebook group, and I saw her testimony. So I'm always intrigued when I see somebody's testimony, and they had a similar background to me, into kind of new age spirituality and all that kind of stuff. And then she put me onto you guys that you created a group called Wild Branches, which maybe you want to start there, just explain a little bit of Wild Branches and what that does.
Yeah, sure. I mean, right now it's just a little small thing we started, I guess, really like a year and a half ago now. But basically, it's just a community for other people who are either have come out come out of the new age, but to be honest, like in my opinion, Christians tend to call new age like it's a cultural thing. We use new age to mean like anything not Christian. But when I was spiritual, not religious or whatever, right? Like I never called myself new age. And I would also say that new age has a specific definition.
Mm.
And so sometimes you'll talk to like, I don't know if you experience this, but sometimes you'll talk to people who are into yoga or whatever. And then you're like, oh, new age. And they're like, oh yeah, I was never part of it. And that can be true. It's actually a certain thing, right? But most Christians just use it like a blanket term that just means like all of it, you know?
Right,
So there's a bit of
right.
like Christianese going on there. But ultimately, it's a group for anybody who, was into anything ranging from like yoga, shamanism, psychedelics, any of that stuff, even like kind of
Mhm.
maybe personal development-y stuff, right?
Yep.
Which has been in my background too. And now they're walking with Jesus. Like anyone who's has gone through that, usually it's for people usually over the last few years or sometimes like literally like, hey, this month. We're just a group where we can share that in common because one, a lot of a lot of the church often doesn't have like a deep background of understanding what that world is like. And so I know at least
Mm.
for me, when I was a newer believer, or even before that, I wanted to talk and learn about Christianity, but I didn't necessarily want to go to the church with it
Mhm.
because I just kind of felt like, well, they don't understand my experience.
Yep.
And to be fair, sometimes that's actually kind of true because as we talked about before, like if you have a background, especially working with like intense psychedelics and all that kind of stuff, and then you have these wonderful Christians, but like they've never done a drug in their life or whatever, it's like they actually don't have that very unique experience. So the idea is that it's a group for people who basically get it because we all came from that background and we can answer some of the questions and like in a non-judgmental way as well, right? We have people
Yep.
ask us a lot of questions. Maybe other Christians, hopefully not, but might feel a little judgy or a little like, whoa. But for
Mm.
us, we're just like, yeah, dude, we've all been there, we get it. And so we just have
Yep.
discussions about that. And then there's also a side as well where sometimes we're just evangelizing or having deep discussions with non-believers who've been feeling a little pull towards Christianity or wondering why so many of their friends or people they know now are becoming Christian. Like, what the heck is going on? And so there's a bit of a just a, discussion side. So it's either working with, newer believers and supporting them or people who aren't, but are maybe we call it going through a Jesus crisis.
Mhm.
Where
Yep.
it's just like, what is going on? Why am I thinking about Jesus? For the first time ever, or maybe the first time in a long time. So that's it. We're just a
Yeah.
group.
Yeah. No, I totally get that because I'm in a couple of different groups now. I've got a couple of fellowships like more local to me, but there is just some kind of questions which I think that unless you've actually gone through the same kind of background as we both did, I think you just get to see it in a different perspective, I guess, just because you can relate a lot more. And I see that the value in having that space, especially like you say, a lot of churches. are not necessarily equipped. They don't understand how to maybe minister to people that have opened so many doors in this kind of other spiritual, kind of realm. So, um, but yeah, if you want to maybe just explain maybe a bit of like your background and what actually drew you into kind of new age spirituality, like what kind of what started it for you, and where did that go?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually grew up in a kind of Christian family. My parents were divorced and remarried, so I kind of had a split in the family. And like half the family were Christians and half weren't. So I always kind of had a bit of that dynamic. But I grew up at least occasionally. We'd go to church on Sunday and all of that. And at least in my case, I think I was just a rebellious and also curious child. And I had tons of questions. Well, why this? And and a lot of stuff that even like people question Christians today about even simple stuff like, okay, well, if everyone, you're born in a certain culture or certain country and everyone's Christian and you think your religion's the right religion, but like everyone thinks that their religion's the right religion. So how do you actually know that yours is the right one? And what about what all these other people believe? Like I remember being like 11 and 12 and like thinking and asking these types of questions.
Mm,
Um, but I just wasn't getting a lot of answers from my parents or from anybody else. And I don't blame them. From my understanding, talking to my family now, like, they were more lukewarm, as they sometimes say, like, when I was a kid.
mm,
And my mom's faith, for example, has, like, grown tremendously since then, because she had me when she was, like, 19, so she was pretty young too. So it's just like but at the time, I wasn't getting a lot of answers to my questions, and so I just kinda thought that the stories of Christianity I also think I talk about this sometimes with other people in the church, because I think it's something we need to work on, but not assuming that little kids can only handle, like, the little kid version of some of the stories.
right.
Because maybe that's true, but for me, it was like, if you take the most shallow version of some of the stories, like Noah's Ark or whatever, and you don't give any real depth, to be honest, they can sound like a fairy tale story or like a silly story.
Yeah.
It wasn't until way later when I was an adult and I was revisiting, going much deeper with the stories that I started to realize like there's such a depth and a brilliance and a
Mm,
wisdom to the whole thing, right? So even as a kid, it was kind of like man in the clouds, Noah's Ark, like how is it even possible? So, it was one of those like I thought I was kind of too smart for it, but in reality, I was just like very ignorant. But ultimately, it led to this curiosity about what other cultures believed and other religions, etc. And then another thing that's kind of interesting, I around 17, 18, one, I started taking some mushrooms as a teenager and some other things, and like curiosity was, my mind was expanding. But also, I was a big backpacker,
mm,
like hardcore backpacker, and I was not taking very good care of my body. Long story short, I ended up with like a very intense injury on my leg. And so I started going to hot yoga classes in California down the road because I thought it would help. Totally not into spiritualism at all. I was just there because I was hurting and in pain, and it was really helping. But man, that subtle little seed because, then there's a Buddha on the wall, and then there's a vibe like and then I start getting interested in meditation, then I start what I mean? And next thing you know, like, I'm living down in Guatemala at an ashram worshiping Kali, it's just like and now I look back on it, I was like, "Man," like, so, whatever. I don't think stretching is evil or anything, I don't go that far with it, but, like, there's something clever to all that, right?
yeah.
So, anyways, kinda how it was. Then I got into meditation, then I got into other stuff, but I kinda made an internal decision for myself that at a young age that I was very interested in something deeper in spirituality or whatever.
Mhm.
But, like, Christianity can't be it. It must not be this. And so I basically just bounced off of that and started looking into absolutely everything else I could get my hands on. And I didn't have like a deep, some people have had church hurt or whatever, right? And they have like a real animosity towards Christianity. I didn't really
Yeah.
have that. I just like kind of by default, without even realizing I had done it, assumed that like that's not where the answers are. And I went everywhere else.
Yeah. Um, like obviously with where you're at now, right? You've obviously found a lot more places to get maybe some answers with maybe like your walk with God and all things like that. So like what do you think like back then maybe prevented you from, you obviously said you couldn't find the answers. Was it because you were quite young and it was kind of maybe like you just didn't know how to access maybe like whether it was other churches or other people that maybe had more of an intimacy with the Lord and that could maybe answer those questions, like what would you say kind of caused you to go down the other path instead of that?
Yeah, I think it's 2 things. I think at the deepest level, of course, it's so important that, like, the parents have a deep connection with the Lord because they raise their
Right.
children in that, right? Like, I was raised in a kinda Christian family, but did I personally know Jesus? No.
Mm.
I don't know, I just never
Right.
felt it. I never had I
Yeah.
don't know, I didn't even really know that was a thing to do, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't personally praying, I wasn't doing the things that we do.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, that's beyond all apologetics or anything, I think you'd agree, like, personal relationship is what matters beyond all else
Mm.
because I know Jesus today the way that I know you,
Mm.
right? And it's so funny, you get, like, atheists or whoever, like, try to convince you that Jesus isn't real or Jesus isn't true, and, like, to me, it's just as crazy as if someone said, like, "Luke doesn't exist." You know, and I'm like,
Right.
"Dude, I'm just talking to him, like, I met the guy, like, what are you talking about?" You know, like,
Yeah.
there's nothing
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can do to say Jesus isn't real because I know him on such a personal
Yeah.
level. So in the absence of that, right, there's just such a huge vulnerability to believing all kinds of stuff because the
Mhm.
core anchor, which is our personal relationship with Jesus, isn't there. And
Yeah.
to be honest, if that's there, I couldn't really call myself a Christian either at that time, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So, that's the most important by far.
Yeah.
Had I known the Lord in my heart the whole time through, I think and I've heard this from other people who, like, maybe in their teenage years or whatever, they drift, but if they had that deep seed planted I've heard this from so many people where they're like, "Deep down, though, I never stopped, like, believing in Jesus on some level
Hmm.
because the connection was made," right? So that's the most important thing, and then I think the second thing is just, yeah, like, I could have benefited from just a little bit deeper Bible study. I think I would have loved it, honestly, at a young age. But I think the
Yeah.
perception, this is my personal experience, was that, like, kids aren't ready for that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so I was
Yep.
always
Yep.
church kids' church, and I was always in, you know what I mean? And I was just one of those kids where, like, I just didn't want that. I was like, I would even tell my mom, like, "Take me to the big church." Like, I wanted the real stuff,
Mm.
and I just felt like I wasn't getting it. And then when I was, like, 15 or whatever, I actually started watching videos. This is the very first thing, but I started watching videos that popped up on YouTube, from Alan Watts. And I don't know, it was like entering into an adult conversation. Even though now I would disagree with a lot of what was being said, at the time, it felt very deep and it felt very real and it felt like, "Whoa." Like,
Mm.
yeah,
Yep.
and I just didn't get that with Christianity, so I assumed that Christianity didn't have that to offer, and that's not true. It just wasn't my experience.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And obviously you explained where you kind of started off with a bit of yoga and then you ended up in a kind of ashram worshipping Kali. So like obviously that's a big jump there. So
Yeah.
like what would you say like after you started getting into yoga and all that kind of stuff? And I think you said you mentioned took some plants and stuff like that. Like what was that process like, right? Like was it over a 10-year period? Like how long was it over? And can you share maybe some aspects of like, what maybe started pulling you into it more? Like, what was the thing that started kind of feeling like that was the truth in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, with the Alan Watts stuff, I started downloading, like, all of his long he has, like, 6-hour-long series, 9-hour-long series, and I think I must have listened to them over and over and over again for, like, years. So, that was one thing, I was very into that, and then that got me into interest in Zen and interest in meditation, etcetera, but then, I left home to travel around the world. That was a whole other little story, but ultimately, I just wanted to see the world. And, like, I grew up in a bubble in California, which is a beautiful place, but the way I grew up and my perception of it was that it was very much like in the box cookie cutter. Everyone has the same little box house, same little box lifestyle, and, like, a same pathway, you know? It's like, then we go to college, and then we and I was just always like, "Well, I don't really know if that's what I wanna do." I would wanna originally, I was like, "I wanna take a year off between high school and college and do the whole find myself kinda thing." And so I got into that and, started touring around the country, living out of my car. I went to all 48 states. I was just kind of exploring. And originally, it was a little bit more of a Jack Kerouac, like, into the wild. I love backpacking nature stuff, but then that started to bleed more into, like, exploring the spiritual dimension more and more. So I just got very curious about all that. And, I didn't take a year. I ended up traveling around for, like, 12 years and never went to college and just, like, that was that. Like, I never went back to that. It was always like, "No, I'm gonna pursue this." And once I really got into the spirituality, it's kind of interesting, right? Like people, different people want to push themselves in different ways, right? Like I have an old friend of mine who's an amazing guy, but he was like a hardcore MMA, a real fighter, and different things like that. And we became good friends, and I was always so impressed by him on the physical level, and just the ways in which he decided to push himself. I decided to push myself when it came to spirituality and like the mind. And
Mhm,
so I was really just honestly curious, like, how far does this go? I started getting into some witchcraft, magic, Reiki,
mhm,
psychedelics, journeying, astral projection, like all of it, because I
yeah,
just wanted to know, yeah, like, where does that road go if you follow it as far as you could possibly go? And so I basically just dedicated my life to that. That was like the only thing I was doing, right? I was volunteering in different ashrams and studying with different teachers and different paths, just
yep,
to be curious of that type of self mastery, I guess you could say.
yep. No, that makes sense. And when you kind of had a couple of those experiences, can you name a couple of like really intense spiritual encounters that you had that made you really feel like that was the truth, even though it wasn't?
Yeah. Yeah, there was one. Yeah. The biggest one in the beginning was I had been taking some psychedelics in different contexts, usually in nature or whatever, but I was pretty young and I wasn't particularly trying to be spiritual in it, at least in my early
Hmm.
days. Although it always impacts you and kind of changes your way of thinking a little bit, right? For better or worse. But then I had a mentor of mine who was a lot older than me and another guy who was kind of more equipped to like really treat psychedelics as like an opportunity to journey. And I had one journey with him where he started guiding me deeper and showing me like this is how you meditate on these and this is how you open yourself up in a more spiritual way. And in that first journey, I had very, very intense encounter with these like ET beings, or at least that's what I thought at the time. But these like Pleiadian extraterrestrial beings who like broke into this dimension, operated on my mind, and like they basically was like a whole
Hmm.
visitation experience, essentially.
Yeah.
That was extremely visceral and like changed my entire life.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And then I got very into the ET kind of thing and communicating with them in different levels, and beings like that started showing up on all my psychedelic journeys, and that took me down a path for sure.
In what way did it change your life?
Man, it's hard to explain. I think like at the time it felt like my world just really expanded because
Okay.
the way that it like happened, it was as if because it was under the stars and I was meditating under the stars and I had these like being like contacting my mind. In the
Hmm.
beginning kind of freaked me out. And so I told the mentor who was like guiding me at the time what was happening. And he was basically like, well, does it feel evil? Does it feel benevolent? And I was like, it feels benevolent, but I think I need to just go sit alone under the stars and like open myself up to that. So I did.
Hmm.
And when that happened, it was as if like the bubble around what I thought the universe was like shattered and it
Hmm.
expanded infinitely because it was as if I could almost feel into space, like the vastness
Hmm.
of space. And then they came down as if it was very similar to like what you'd imagine, like down from a spaceship is what it felt like, and started operating on my brain. And so
Right.
they were like doing a thing and I could feel it in my brain. And I was kind of half dazed, very similar to how people who have ET experiences talk about being like under anesthesia. That's how it felt for like an hour as they just did their thing. But I mean, I don't know, it changed my thinking on some level for sure. But also it just changed my, like, a lot of people just live in that little bubble. I go to work and they don't think about the bigger existential kind of
Right.
thing. And
Yeah.
that was just shattered for me. So suddenly the universe became like a very big place. And I got even
Yeah.
more interested in where that goes.
Yeah. And would you say that it more kind of expanded your mind and your thinking, or did it also kind of bring some healing through those journeys as well? And you kind of understood that there was an element to that, or because some people have
I
different
mean,
experiences.
yeah, in that journey, it was more of like an expansion of my,
Okay.
like, yeah. In other journeys, of course, I've had like at least the experience of having deep, profound healings and stuff like that. But this particular
Yeah.
journey wasn't quite like that. But
Hmm.
what started to happen though was that when they connected with me, there was a very particular like sound and frequency that kind of came with like something I can't replicate, like maybe a DJ could, but I had a very particular like sound. And when I started taking other psychedelics in the future, which I wasn't doing constantly, every 3 months, or maybe 6 months, or maybe once a year, I'd have a journey. But they would show up again and then again and then again. And then it started to be working with other teachers. I started to train myself to get the same connection just through meditation without the psychedelics.
Mhm. Yep.
So then I started to have these like telepathic kind of connection with these entities, these beings, without the psychedelics, just through meditation.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
that became more and more frequent. And then eventually that became a thing where it was like instantaneous. I didn't even need to meditate. I could always kind of connect with these beings. And then I was kind of channeling them, and
Yep.
that connection stronger and stronger and stronger. And this was under the influence of another teacher that came later, but they were basically telling me that, like, well, these beings are here to help you ascend and reach new levels, and they're
Mhm.
upgrading you, energetically, blah, blah, blah. And so I was being deeply encouraged to open myself up to these beings as much as possible,
Yep.
even
No,
to the point that, well,
go on.
when we're not, even to the point where by the end of it, I had one teacher who was training me to basically be like operated by these entities in bed every single night for like
Wow.
9 hours at a time. Yeah, and it would feel like my bed became like an operating table, and I was essentially, it felt like I was having ET visitation every single night, even to the point
Mhm.
where I was sleeping for like 11 hours a night for like 3 years. Because when
Wow.
they would as I would go to sleep, I could feel them come in, very intense energy. I could feel all the same frequencies, and sometimes it came in like a zzz, 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 and they would straight up be like working on my mind, my heart, whatever, but they would put me under that same like anesthesia kind of feeling. And so if I tried to wake up, like let's say I woke up at 7 in the morning the next morning, if they weren't done, I would feel this like intense headache and this intense like go back to sleep. We're still working on it. And then sometimes even like an hour later, I'd sleep for 1 more hour or maybe 2, 3 more hours. And then I'd wake up and then they'd pull back and they would go. And then I'd have my day. And my teacher was basically like, this is, oh, he's treated it as like this is a way for you to really accelerate the process because now you could be getting these upgrades all night long. You have all this time for downloads. And so I was just letting that happen for like 3 straight years. And it was very intense. But yeah, like I was sleeping all the time. I felt like my sleep life was almost more important than my real life. Um, yeah, and that's basically where I was at
Mhm.
up until Jesus, essentially. But yeah.
Yeah. Um, from your understanding now, these Pleiadian beings and these light beings, from your understanding now, what is actually happening there? And what are these beings?
Yeah, I 100%, I don't even it's not even I know that they are demons. Like, that's not a doubt in my mind. And how I got there, because first, I remember I had one friend who used to be like a hardcore like, witch, like really deep into the witchcraft, the ayahuasca, kind of the sacred sexuality, temple work,
Hmm.
who then became like a full born again
I
Christian.
know that one,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And her testimony is like one of the most intense testimonies I've ever heard. But she is just completely, and she was my first friend who went like now full Christian. And I was starting to talk to her, and she was the first one that started telling me, like, look, these entities you're connecting with are deep. And at the time, I was like, you don't know my experience. It's hard. It is because I had such a profound, and the experiences you have are so visceral, especially with the psychedelics, that, I started telling her, like, if I'm totally wrong about that, then I don't know what is true or real. Like, if that's the case, I'm just profoundly confused, because to me, this is so real. And you don't know my experience, so how could you know, right? So, like, and I've talked to people about this where, like, that's one of the hardest things to break through when you've had these really intense experiences with these other beings or whatever it is, and it's so true to you. To have someone else come and be like, "Well, no, those are demons," like, you know?
Right.
No, they're not, no, they're not. They're light beings, they're amazing, they've changed my life. But she was trying to persuade me in that, and we were having these, like, back and forths. But and this is kind of jumping ahead, but this was after I was already receiving the Holy Spirit, opening up to Jesus, and, like, one of the last kind of questions I had was, for myself was, "Okay, I'm definitely just following Jesus. I don't need anything else. Like, this is pretty deep in my conversion at this point, but I don't really know what to think about these beings, and I don't want to just jump to, well, other Christians tell me they're demons, so I guess they're demons." You know what I mean? So I kinda just let God, like, unravel that with me slowly over time. But what started to happen was I figured whether they're demons or not, or whatever is going on there, I don't have that figured out yet. I'm new to the faith. There's so much to learn, but I do know that the connection I have with Jesus is just so much better. That was clear.
Yeah.
And so I decided, like, I'm not going to intentionally tune in with anything else but Jesus now. So at night, I tried to tune out of that stuff, right? I wasn't trying to contact them. I was trying to push that aside and just develop my relationship with God. In that, I started to notice over time that the energy, the feeling I would have from these beings, because they were still like around me a lot of times, was not so positive anymore. They started getting angry. They started getting aggressive. They started getting frustrated that I wasn't opening myself up anymore. And once I started to really catch on to that, it really started to freak me out because I had never, they were always benevolent. They were always my friends, my spirit guides. You know what I mean? I never had even really thought of the possibility that they could get like angry at me. And the more angry they became, the Holy Spirit was helping me opening my eyes too, right? And that's what the Bible tells us happens, right? He opens our eyes to see the world for what it really is. And so I started to feel like the veil that those entities wear, because that's what it is. It's a veil, it's a mask, right? Beings of false light. They are shapeshifters. They live in a spirit dimension. They are non physical. They can change shape. They can shapeshift. They can present themselves however they want. And side note, but what they'll do is they will present themselves in the form that is the most likely for you to be interested.
Mm.
My dad was a space nerd. I grew up watching Star Trek, like whatever. I was interested in the alien question since I was young. So how did they come to me? They're extraterrestrials. My friend Mia, she's super into that. She was also into fairies and she's into, you know what I mean? And so who do you end up encountering on the spiritual dimension? Fairies and you know what I mean? Or
Right.
it's Hindu gods or it's whatever they think you will let in because of who you are. They're watching you and they start to figure out, you know,
Right.
who might Luke be interested in. And they take the
That
shape of that.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. That's just gave me a realization of like why I've encountered the things the way that I did, and I didn't even understand it because yeah, that's pretty powerful. Now obviously that that woman came to you, she was born again Christian. She said that th those are demons, right? But back in that space of, you know, you're really deep into New Age spirituality, you're doing all these different journeys and all that kind of stuff. Apart from that conversation with her, was there anything that kind of any bad experiences um, that maybe like was also like raising alarm bells and like thinking like there's something got to be not right here, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, totally, totally. And it's so funny because looking back, like I think one of the man, because it's not just the psychedelics or whatever, right? It's also about the spiritual culture around it and what
Right.
we're told, including what shamans tell you or guides tell you. Because of course, looking back now, I'm like, okay, some of those experiences, at least at the time, were positive, good, seemed helpful. Some of those beings seemed like my friends. But if I think about it objectively, well, yeah, some of them were also super scary. Some of the aliens look like Predator. Like I had one time where this like literally like from the movie Predator, like that type of an alien like came at me and scared the shit out of me. But then these other aliens came in as like my friends and blocked them. And then they explained to me those were bad ones, but we're good ones. And like it's just such a crazy mind, you know, it's just screwing with your head. Like, oh, okay, the bad ones are gone. Good ones are here now. We're here to help you and then, you know, and then whatever. And it's just you get so turned around. But like, no, I mean, of course, like I've died a bunch of times on ayahuasca, right? Like really died and then come back and you're losing yourself in other dimensions and your nervous system is fried and there's all these weird entities and some of them are good and some of them are bad and some of them just overwhelm you, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't know if they're good or bad. I'm just like, this is way beyond me and it freaks you out. No, there's a ton of stuff that's not positive. But then you get this culture that's always telling you that, like, that's part of your journey, right? Like, how many times have I
Right.
been told
If
ayahuasca people after I have this horrible experience of vomiting and dying and leaving, and I'm terrified.
yeah,
And they're like, you survived. So now
yeah.
you've unbound.
Like you
You're
need
gonna
to integrate more of your shadow, or you need to, you know what I
go
mean? They
right.
put it on you and
Yeah.
I
No
get
matter what
that.
you've had, like they always say, like, no matter what experience you have, whether it's good or bad, it's always good. Like they will tell you this before ceremony, right? So it's like you're being gaslit to be like, I had a horrific experience last night. Good
Yeah,
for you.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? So because I believed all that, I always recontextualized whatever I experienced as something positive. And now looking back, I'm like, yeah, maybe it's not good actually to be like operated on by weird entities, which by the way, no matter what story the entities tell you, you don't know if it's true because you can't prove it. And that's the biggest issue. This is what I try to
Mm.
explain to people now when they're talking about this kind of stuff. And it's like, you know, well, I love Bashar and I love, Cryon. Like I was into all that kind of stuff. These different channelers who say they're channeling aliens
Right.
from other planets, blah, blah, blah. But the question is like, okay, but how do you prove that though? Because we can't go to that planet and confirm, right? Like, I don't see them as a physical being. I don't see their spaceship. Like, it's all kind of spiritual stuff that there's just no way to confirm.
Right.
Like, they tell you a story and you're believing
Yeah.
that story. I objectively, right? Okay, you say you're from the Pleiades. How the hell do I know if that's actually true?
Right. And it's
I
not
don't.
like with the Bible, you've got something to test it against scripture. There's everything's taken from everywhere. So how do you know where it's even coming from?
For sure. For sure.
Right.
And once I realized like, oh, well, these spirits, like, first of all, most people have understood there's spirits here on the earth, you know. Now they've rebranded a lot of times in the modern world because I also think that works really well for the modern mind as aliens from other planets. But again, like you didn't see them show up here, you just see a spirit and like
Yeah.
maybe that's the spirit who's already here. But anyways, just to round it out there, basically the Holy Spirit opened my eyes, the veil fell and those light beings that I knew for years and years and years, once I could see them through the eyes of Jesus, immediately they looked like terrifying demons. So I had
Wow.
no doubt that like, holy crap, these things are demons. Then I was really freaked out because I was thinking, it's very humbling, right? My whole ego of I thought I knew what this was gets flipped on its head. And this whole like the Holy Spirit even started showing me that all this light that they were pouring into me was like
Yeah.
utter black, just darkness. It was pure darkness. And it really was like, whoa, I get chills just thinking about it. 'Cause how the Holy Spirit started taking me even into my soul, even in my chakras, even
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
places within myself where I was letting them like do stuff. And it literally looked like temples of darkness covered in like a black sticky goo. This is how the Holy Spirit was showing
Wow.
it. Like they are erecting strongholds into your being for years and years and years. And I'm thinking, holy crap, I've been letting this in every single night. They have this very intense influence over me because I gave them that. And now it turns out that like they're pissed that their channel won't connect with them. And now they want to put pressure on me because I've, given them this authority. And so it was a very intense time of spiritual warfare. And I was a Christian at this point, right? But like just brand new and having my eyes open. And I'm very grateful the Holy Spirit showed me that I clearly needed to see it. But it was very humbling. It was very intense. And it literally just flipped my world upside down. So, I understand why a lot of people have a hard time accepting that because it is hard to accept. But
Mm. Right. It's been your identity for God knows how many years and how long. Right? It's just ingrained into everything who you are. Right. The one thing that I'm always kind of like I wonder on and what kind of brought me into trusting a lot of the new age stuff and people was you mentioned there you listened to a lot of teachers that explained whether meditation or connecting to these beings. Like, what do you think made you trust these people and these teachers? Because I'm always curious to know, right? Because we just blindly trust people and then it's like
yeah. No, I mean, I wonder too, because looking back, so much of it makes no sense. And like now, and I've done a lot of work on myself to like unravel, like, before, because at one point, without getting into all of it, but I became a teacher for this kind of stuff too. I had courses and I had a community and I was coaching and I was working with hundreds of people, groups, one to one, like teaching this stuff. And now I love, like, I spent a lot of time debunking myself and rethinking these things and realizing like that doesn't actually make any freaking sense. So I do wonder, like, so why did I even believe it in the first place? And I think it's a combination of maybe three things. One is that when all these people, because I started hanging out in these groups, right, who are all into this, and when everyone believes the same thing and is reinforcing it, you kind of assume that like that it must be true,
right.
So just surrounded by all these spiritual people saying the same kind of cliche stuff that if you really think it through, logically doesn't make sense. But everyone's into it. And so I'm like, okay, I guess that's true. I think it's partially that. I think it's partially that you're told over and over and over again to trust your subjective experience. And
Yeah.
we are trained by all of these different paths. They all do it because it's all one system, really. But they train you to shut off your critical thinking 100%. You are trained to follow your feelings, follow your experience, follow what resonates. Right? Like, and now as a Christian, like sometimes I will try to, I'm sure you're like reasoning with someone with good reason and facts and evidence, and they're like, well, that's nice for you, but this is what resonates with me. And it's like, that's not reality though, like
Right.
cool, but, like, and of course I don't judge because I think I used to think the exact same way. Everything was subjective. They convince
Mhm.
you, me and Joe and I in Wild Branches were like through the little group, right? But like we've really tried to dissect this and figure out what's at the bottom, and it's an assault on truth. Because once you live in a world where truth is subjective and we all live in our own personal realities and you can make it up for yourself, facts and evidence and objective reality is relevant because and I'll have people say, well, that's cool for you, but this is what the reality that works for me. And everyone's just making up their own crap. So at its core, if we get rid of truth with a capital T, like the objective reality and everything becomes a subjective reality where you live in your own reality, then it doesn't matter. You can just make up whatever feels good to you. And that's how most people operate. And that's, we know, is a huge tool of the enemy because it makes it really hard. And usually now, when we're like really working with someone, dealing with this issue about what actually is truth is like the first thing we go to. Because until that gets handled, you almost can't do anything else. Because we can't talk about the facts of the Bible and why we know that this has so much more to stand on than other paths, whatever, if there's no concept of truth.
Yeah.
So when you're living in that and then other people reinforcing it and reinforcing that idea, and then you throw in a dose of strong drugs and, to make the experiences you're having hyper powerful and hyper real, I think those three things working together, it locks you in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that
don't know. I
makes
mean,
sense.
what would you, I'd be curious to know, like, what would you add to that?
Um, yeah, so what would I add to that? The thing that kind of pulls you in. Like I explain it like I look at the new age like spirituality scene like almost like a pyramid scheme.
Mm,
Like like it's almost like say like you jump into like an MLM and there's loads of people um at the top that are doing really well financially. And then there's just
mhm,
like millions of people at the bottom that don't really get anywhere.
mm,
So my like understanding is that because I had a lot of mentors and coaches that seemed to have everything that I wanted in life.
mm,
Like they had the community, they had the friends, they had like the lands, they had the off-grid lifestyle, um and they had just what I felt that I everything I wanted, so I was chasing it through all these other people. And I see him as Satan's got his puppets where he
mm,
doesn't actually create as much destruction on the people that are at, like this kind of topper, like the ones that run the festivals, the one that run these big movements. I really feel that Jesus is going to come and break that all at some point, but I feel that Satan's very clever. And there's a lot of people in New Age that are stuck at that bottom, millions of people that are just trying to figure it out. And then there's a certain bunch of people that are kind of using it to just draw people in and really getting them chasing on that wheel. So I think that was like just my own experience in terms of the thing that I was just searching for truth and I was just trusting these people. One of the things that I really the Lord had to heal me from was opening myself up to people and actually
mm,
getting completely, um, what's the word? Almost like re-traumatized through all these people and their beliefs and their things. So it was just making things so much worse, but I trusted them with my life, right? So there was
mm,
so much brokenness inside of me because of that. So it became really hard for me to trust again with a lot of even Christians. So praise the Lord, that's not now been gone. But I would say that for me is like uh, a major aspect to that. Now for you, like if um if there's someone watching this and they're still taking some of these psychedelic journeys, they're still worshipping these idols, and they're connecting to these light beings, or they're doing something right, which is giving them answers and truth. Like, what would you say to them in their shoes? Like, what would you say to them? And in terms of like what kind of helped you through that kind of transition, if they are maybe questioning what they're going through.
Yeah. I mean, man, I think ultimately there's just a really honest, like, because this is what started happening to me, right? Was as I started to learn, I was getting curious about Christianity and for other reasons, right? I was starting to re-explore a little bit. In part, by the way, because this is kind of funny, but when I was a kid and I asked about what other religions believed, my parents and people would say, well, we don't really know much about it, but it's wrong. And I thought that was a really shallow answer that wasn't going to work. And so I figured I'll go figure it out myself. Fast forward 15 years later, I'm super deep in the spiritual community. And I started for a few different reasons wondering about the major world religions because most of us don't talk about that stuff, particularly Christianity, but the other ones too. And I started thinking, like, okay, there's like 2 billion Christians supposedly on the earth. And like they think they're super into something that they see as very spiritual and their whole life is all about it. Why don't we ever talk about that in these circles? I've been in these circles for 10 years. We never talk about that other than some shallow, well, they're brainwashed and, that's organized religion, bad. You know what I mean? But it's like, that's not much of an answer, And so I started asking and discussing it in my own community, like, well, what about this? Like, what do we know about this? And the answer was very similar to what I got as a kid, which is, well, we don't really know much about it, but we know that it's bad and wrong. And once I realized that immediately, like this feeling pulled on me of like, that's a stupid answer. I'm going to go over there and talk to them and start finding out myself. And that opened the door to this reinvestigation of like, how about I learn about Christianity from the Christians, not what spiritual people tell me it is. Right. Like
Right.
in the same way, rather than the Christians telling me what the Hindus believe, why don't I go over there and I'll find out with them? So that's kind of what started to open this like thought process of like, let me actually like, what's the harm in finding out? And if you're truly, and I think a lot of spiritual people are very sincere about their desire for pursuing truth, like you're saying. And that's what I admire about the new age. I really do, because it's very easy to be distracted by the things of this world. And you can just focus on your job and money and wealth and cars. And like most spiritual people have a deep pull towards like, I want something real and I want something deeper. And so we go looking and then we just get taken to very strange places. But I really admire the looking and I admire the courage because it is not easy to go smoking pipes of bufo. And you know what I mean? Like with all the judgment we often get of like, oh, shallow yoga people, like I get it. There is some, but there's also a part where like, look, meditating 8 hours a day or whatever is freaking difficult. Like, and these
Yep.
people just really want truth. And I really admire that. And I notice, as I'm sure you do too, I see this in wild branches all the time, that a lot of the people who do finally find the Lord, they're on fire for God, man. Like, because
Mm,
we
yeah.
know it's real. We
Yeah.
know it, you know what I mean? Like, and they're
Yeah.
just, oh, and they finally find that truth that they've been looking for the whole time, and you know it, and it's just like, oh man. So, anyways, if you're like deep in that place, the thing I started to reflect on, because the message of Christianity, what at the very, very simplest version, when I first started to hear it and understand it a little bit, was basically like, look, no matter how hard you try, you will never get there on your own. And you have not gotten there. This place you think you're trying to get to, you've not got there. And every other spiritual path says because you need to try harder, you
Right.
need to work harder, you need to remove your ego more, right? And it's always like, I
Like
remove my ego.
I would
Right there.
I
Yeah,
was
that,
chasing like enlightenment. Like I really was chasing like that. Like that was my end goal in a way, but like that's never gonna happen. Like
never gonna
really, like it's just never gonna happen.
Yeah, and we all know that we all discover along the way, the gurus and the teachers, whoever you're following, like, oh, another sex scandal. Oh, another, oh, they're an
Right.
insane narcissist. Like, they're never there. And you know what's
Yeah,
so funny? What
it shows in the fruits.
for sure, for sure. And you actually start to realize that these paths tell you that up front, but you ignore it. Because there's like a famous quote, I forget, it's been a long time, but where is it? Either it's a Buddhist thing or a Zen thing where it's like, if you think you've reached enlightenment, you haven't, and you've been yet to be further instructed. There's these sayings about that, like those who think they're enlightened, those who think you understand the Tao don't understand the Tao. Those who think you've reached enlightenment haven't reached it because it's your ego that thinks you've reached it. And we take that as like a mystical thing. But if you actually take it as face value, what it's saying is you cannot reach enlightenment. And if you think you've gotten it, you haven't gotten it. Why? Because you can't get it.
Right.
Because you would think it would be like, don't worry, one day you'll know you've reached it, right? But it's like, oh, if
Right.
you think you've reached it, you haven't reached it. So it's like, well, then when the hell have I reached it? And the answer is never. Even in
Right.
its own, it tells you that,
It's
but we
flawed. Yeah.
like, yeah, we
The devil leaves clues. I always notice that now. When you look back, but you don't notice necessarily the clues when you're so wrapped into it. Like you don't
yeah,
actually spot it. Like it's kind of like the veils over your eyes.
right. Yeah, or like the Zen master who says, it's like the classic, like you knock on the door and they answer right at the ashram and they say, well, I have nothing to teach you. And then you're like, no, I know you do, right? And be like, and then they're like, all right, we'll teach you a bunch of crap. And then there's a whole game being played, right? And
Right.
we just don't know this.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I started like, I would just say, look, if you've been doing this for a long time, just start to really be honest with yourself. Don't compartmentalize, don't ignore, and look, what are the places in your life that have been helped by this, or you've gotten where you want to get to, and where are the places that you haven't? Because I started to realize, I've been doing this for 15 years. I spent my entire life focused on this. This is all I've done with the idea that I was going to help me, heal me, enlighten me, whatever. And then I started to realize, like, if I'm being honest, there's still places of deep brokenness, habits I haven't overcome, things that I can't seem to change, stuff where I'm still very stuck, areas in my life where my life is still an absolute mess.
Mhm.
And it was like, how much longer do I have to keep doing this kind of stuff before I start to accept that maybe it's not that I'm not doing it good enough, which is what they always tell you, it's you. Well, no, maybe it's not me. Maybe it's that this stuff doesn't really work the way that I've been told.
Yeah.
And, the message of Jesus started to be like, to me in the very beginning, right, was just this idea of like, you can't get where you're trying to get to, not because you're not good enough. It's because none of those paths will ever get you there. And you need something else. And
Yeah.
Jesus comes to offer us to help take us there, right? In a way that nothing else ever will get us there. And I just started to realize, like, maybe I do need help. And I started to realize, like, I don't know, my connection with the Lord, like, he was so much more loving in a real way. These entities are very
Yeah.
powerful and I
Yeah.
admired them, but their love was very cold,
Mm.
at least in contrast to the love of Jesus. He started to connect with me in a way where it was as if he really cared. And I never got that from any of these entities in the way that he delivered it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. And just to kind of, as we start to kind of, kind of finish this up here, can you give any kind of practical steps for someone that is on that verge of transition? Something that helped you at the start of the journey, and just some things to be aware of, like spiritual warfare and what might actually happen in that kind of initial kind of transition there.
yeah, I guess I think of two things. I think of one, and again, at least for me, I I made an agreement with myself and Jesus in the very beginning when I was just curious that I'm gonna put everything else aside that I typically do, and I'm gonna focus solely on building a connection with Jesus through prayer and learning more about Christianity. And at the time, it wasn't like because I'm becoming a Christian necessarily. I didn't know what was gonna happen. I just knew I was feeling a pull towards it. But I also knew from previous experiences that anytime I committed to a path for a period of time, I grew a lot. I committed to Tai Chi for a period of time. I lived the Tai Chi temple, right? I was doing Tai Chi for 5 hours a day. Then I did the yoga thing. But like, just because rather than taking a little bit of everything, I would commit in one direction for a period of time. And even if I didn't stay on that direction forever, I knew I gained a lot by having that commitment. And so my approach to the faith initially was a little bit like that, where I thought, okay, Jesus, like, this it's not gonna hurt. This is not gonna hurt me by deciding to open myself up to Christianity and be on this path for a little while. And maybe I'll stay, maybe I won't. But I just said, okay, so no more entities, no more meditation, no more all this other stuff, no more learning from other teachers. I'm gonna focus on learning about the faith and connecting with Jesus, see what happens. And so I kind of made a little handshake deal, And I was like, I'll do it for like 3 months and then we'll see. And at least in my experience, the second that I did that, he immediately, like, I extended my hand to him and he immediately extended his hand to me, started coming to me in dreams and visions and helping me understand the message and just started like blowing my mind. So that's kind of maybe a very easy way for someone to just kind of take a tentative step in that direction and see what happens. In addition to that, I would just add that I think anyone who's in the process of starting to build their faith, again, we have to approach Christianity maybe a little different than we've approached other things, where it's not just about your subjective feelings. Go learn about the evidence of why we're so convinced, because I'm convinced that Christianity is the most evidence-based and the most reasonable spiritual belief system on the planet, and it doesn't even compare. The amount that we can bring to the table does not compare at all with anything else. And so get into that because we want to build our faith on the truth and facts and reality, not just feelings. And a good example of that, man, I have a good friend of mine who you know, who's currently struggling with cancer. And she came into the faith with that problem.
Mm.
And when she first started approaching Jesus, it was definitely with this, like, I'm hoping that I have this problem and Jesus will fix it for me.
Yep.
And I had to start to eventually, I started kind of talking to her and saying, look, although he might, and praise God if he does, that's not what we should build our faith on, because that's like building on the sand rather than building on the
Mm.
reality of Christ. Because maybe that's not God's plan for you. And I've challenged some people with this because a lot of us do that, right? Like, New Age helped me, this helped me, that helped me. Maybe Jesus can help me. And we almost treat him like another tool or another
Yep.
technique. He's not a tool, he's not a technique, he's a person that we build a relationship with. But the question is, like, can you build your faith in such a way that you would believe it, even if all the things you hope will happen don't happen? And I
Yep.
had to talk to my friend and say, look, what if he doesn't remove this for you and he doesn't perform a miracle? Will you still follow him or not? And that was really beautiful to watch because she's like rock solid now in her faith. But she had to pivot from, I'm hoping it'll help me in this way, to, it's just the truth. I believe in Jesus the way I believe in gravity. Like there's no like, well, only if gravity does this for me. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Mhm.
true because it's true, And I think that's ultimately what we want in our faith, but it's a way stronger faith.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time, Dylan. It's been such a pleasure. I don't know whether you wanted to share anything to do with wild branches. You can do. Don't feel any pressure. I don't know whether you wanted to do that, but if not, we can kind of leave it there.
No, 100%. Mainly we are on Instagram and TikTok. Um, You can find us. There's like a Wild Branches community channel, and then Mia's is Transformed by Faith, which is her
Yeah,
personal, and then mine. I think mine is Dylan at Wild
cool.
Branches, but
Amazing.
that's the way people want to follow us and watch our content or DM us.
Yeah.
We're always super open to talk to people. If you are just wondering and some of this resonates with you and you just want to have a deep conversation, I'll get on a call. I don't care. I'm totally happy to
Yeah.
do that and just have it chat. Or if someone's like new in the faith or whatever and needs to be around other people, like I said in the beginning, who have that
Mhm.
background and can talk things through or just be blessed by that, the group's free to join. We're happy to have people join. Yeah, 100%. Just find us on Instagram or TikTok, either Mia at Transform by
Mhm.
Faith or Dylan at Wild Branches, or we also even just have a Wild Branches. I think it's Wild
Amazing.
Branches
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. I'll basically just drop the links in the description so it's easier for guys. And yeah, thanks again. And till next time, or yeah, thanks again, bro.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. God bless.